pause and acknowledge within the last week and a half, I guess, the loss of life across this country in two mass shootings, both in Atlanta and just the other day in Boulder, Colorado, 30 miles from me. And just, I don't know, have just a moment to just acknowledge, I don't even know how to describe it anymore. I'm trying to not to become numb to it because it's just such a devastating event that happens. I don't want to be numb to it, but just really want to acknowledge the loss of life, significant loss of life, just in the last few days. And so even more appreciate the work of this commission. And would just pause and offer space if anybody wanted to make any comments or share how you may be feeling at this particular time.
I wanted to ask, what was your personal take on the laws that they want to, or the bills they want to pass, or they have already passed, or what do you believe should happen as far as gun control?
You're asking me personally?
Yes, personally.
Wow.
Just a quick take.
A quick take. There needs to be much more significant background checks. There need to be, I think, regulations on or a ban outright on quote unquote assault rifles because there's only one purpose for them. And so just generally, I think there needs to be much stricter control around who can purchase a gun, when you can purchase a gun, the requirements to purchase a gun. It's easier to get a driver's license than a gun. And I just think that's creating some of the difficulties and drama that we see on a regular basis.
And I think that the laws that have passed the Congress ought to be seriously considered by the Senate for passage as well.
I agree.
Steve, what's your take on that? Had to come to you.
My computer froze.
Comprehensive background investigations. I think about 90% of the country agrees with that. I certainly support closing those loopholes. Certainly not an expert on that area, but I think that's one common sense step.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Carol.
Okay, I keep freezing, probably because I'm watching and driving, listening and driving. You know, it's a little sad. It's a lot sad that you cannot go out anywhere anymore, and you can't stay home either. You know, and it became personal with my family this morning, and I'm a little scared. I have talked to Chief Brown about the situation, but you know, what do? All we can do is take all the proper channels. We've talked to the police officers. It wasn't about me. I'm sorry. It wasn't about me. It was about one of my children who hasn't seen this person in 20 years, but he was following the previous administration, and now he's all on board and threatening. So I worry about both of my kids. First off, because they're biracial, and this person is against that. He's got a mental health issue. So we have a case number that's been reported, but now I'm scared. You know, it's like, so what do we do? You know, we can file a restraining order, and they told me that gives you the right, gives law enforcement the right to take action if necessary. But, you know, we're in this country where they don't take it serious. And I guess it's because it hasn't happened. It hasn't hit home. But this is a scary, scary thing. I'm more worried about my son's life than my life. Not that I'm going to do anything, not that I'm going to fight. I'm not a fighter with weapons or at hands. I'm a fighter with my mouth. But it's just a little scary because now it feels like it's too close to home.
Thank you, Carol. I guess it does feel close to home because no matter where you are, it could happen. I think that's the reality that everyone is coming to understand.
That's right. Right.
Other thoughts?
I have a question, Dante. Do you know perhaps why, have they called it a hate crime yet? I know that's been a big issue. Are they still staying away from the word it was a hate crime, and people are saying it wasn't a racial crime, which I do believe it was. Do you have any intake or insight on that, or anybody on the call?
I don't. Like, I haven't watched the news at all today, so I don't know what they may have talked about today.
Pastor Davis, have you heard anything about why they won't call it a hate crime?
Well, just about the one in Atlanta that they are trying to stay away from calling it a hate crime, but the other one, the word doesn't even come up, and the one in Colorado. So that's all I've heard.
So then my question would be, do we need to define what a hate crime is as we move forward with the commission? Because the president is having such a hard time calling the one in Atlanta a hate crime, then other people will do the same.
Well, I mean, I think there is some legislation statewide or otherwise that defines or describes what a hate crime is, or how you can charge a hate crime separate from a killing. But I mean, what the criteria is, I think, varies.
Yeah.
I'd also suggest that's a DA conversation more than a police conversation.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that having the commission define it is, really subject to the decisions that would be made by a prosecutor according to the way it's defined in statute. So perhaps there could be a more stringent, and I'm not an attorney, but I mean, maybe there could be a more stringent definition of it in a local context. But, generally speaking, it's less of the politicians deciding whether or not they think it is, and more of a prosecutor deciding whether she or he can win conviction on that statute, if I understand correctly.
So Larry, can I ask you, we talked last week about the importance of words and language. Mm-hmm. We are having an issue with the language with use of force. So a person of color could be killed like it was in Atlanta, and they can say it wasn't a hate crime. So aren't we running into the same situation? I guess that's my question.
No, I mean,
whether it's use of force or... Yeah,
Commissioner Sheffield, I think this is a valid discussion to have from the standpoint of, pushing either the police department, the local district attorney, or others to think about a hate crime beyond simply what the letter of the law may prescribe. So, I mean, I think there's some merit to that. But again, I think Dante is right. It's less about whether someone in an elected office or even a community leader calls it that, and more about decisions made in terms of how a person is charged. And Dante may know this more than I, but if I'm not mistaken, an initial charging decision can then be updated or amended, I think, to include hate crime charges should the investigation reveal that evidence. And from what I'm gleaning from the reporting on Atlanta, I don't have any inside information, but my sense is that they haven't uncovered the necessary evidence to let them think that they could get a conviction on a hate crime charge. But whether we all or you all or anyone thinks that it's a hate crime is an entirely different matter, I think.
Thank you.
True on both accounts.
I do also know that hate crime legislation varies from state to state, and whether it's expansive or more exclusive is dependent on the state. I don't know what Georgia's hate crime law looks like. I know ours, I've heard it's hard to charge under our current hate crime law, but I don't know. I'm not a prosecutor.
And that's another important point to consider, that most often these kinds of crimes are tried in state court as opposed to federal. And so to the extent that Utah's hate crime statute needs review and updating, I do think that could potentially fall within this commission's purview to evaluate.
Thank you both.
Well, in the past here in Utah, what we have done is gotten federal charges against people when it was a hate crime, and dealt with it that way. Franklin, for example, not Franklin, the guy that killed the two joggers in Liberty Park, was charged with a federal crime and denial of civil rights, and because of that was convicted, but he was not charged with a hate crime.
Thank you.
Just any other thoughts, just making space for how people may be feeling based on the last couple of weeks. And I also think it's important to recognize that given the work that this commission is doing, racial equity in policing, with the focus on addressing inequitable outcomes, specifically for communities of color, and looking at making change to the culture and climate within Salt Lake City Police Department, as well as policies, training, other things, I do think it's important to recognize that an officer did lose his life as he was attempting to confront the shooter in the King Soopers grocery store. I don't think any of us believe that being a police officer is an easy job, or a job that does not, on a daily basis, or the possibility of going home at night. And so I feel like I should acknowledge that, while at the same time also saying, on some level, I was offended, at least by the very first, if you had the opportunity to watch the first press conference, when there were no names and nobody knew how many specifically people had lost their life. But the focus was on the police officer, almost to the exclusion of everybody else who had been killed. And I just felt offended. And to me, it exacerbated the belief sometimes that police officers, well, what the chasm is between police and community. And this is in no way to minimize his loss of life, but to listen to the language of the press conference, specifically said there's been loss of life, and we don't know how many. And also, we are sorry to say that a police officer was killed, and the rest of the press conference was essentially about him. They asked for privacy for his family, although he wasn't even named any more than the other folks who were killed. It just felt offensive to me, and I'm not trying to start a flame war here by minimizing his death at all. But I just think that it was tone deaf, at least by that incident commander, and how he presented the story at the press conference. And I would suggest it's a training film of what not to do and how not to do at a press conference, to ensure that everyone felt the impact of all of the loss of life, and that one was no more important than the others.
I felt the same way, Dante. I heard that and I thought, what about the other families? How are they feeling when they hear this press conference? So I thought the same thing.
Commissioner Johnson has his hand raised, Dante, just as in.
Oh, thank you. I didn't see it. Commissioner Johnson?
I wouldn't say offended, but I was kind of let me rewind. I think the Black community looked at it like, hey, how is this perpetrator being arrested? And the story isn't the other way, that he was killed. I mean, I just believe if it was a black person that killed 10 people, I don't think an arrest would have been made. Put it that way. So when I look at the video and I see him bringing out the perpetrator, and he's still breathing, he's still able to walk, and I mean, carefully apprehended, I'm looking at where, okay, so that's a question of equity right there. In my mind, I don't know. I'm just saying how I felt.
If I can inject, that is the pattern. And it's almost as if we have become accustomed to waiting until we see the pictures, at least the coverage of the news, to see whether or not if the person was apprehended or killed. And the trend is if they are apprehended, it's a white person. If they were killed, they were not. We also have a tendency of waiting to see if the person was of color as to whether or not it's going to be called a hate crime, a terrorist event, or someone suffering from mental illness. That is the pattern lately. So when it happened, I just watched the television just to see how the language of the reporting was. And just by the language that was used in the reporting, I knew that it wasn't a Black person. And it's sad to say that, but it's almost has come to that where we have these media cues as to how they're going to report on these types of incidents. And it's sad. The fact that they're not calling this or the event that took place, and it escaped me right now. I think it was Texas. Was it
Atlanta?
Georgia?
Atlanta.
Yeah. Hate crimes is, we have to take our shoes off to fly a plane because of one incident. But every day, almost, we're having mass shootings where, of course, they categorize, I believe, mass shootings have to be more than 6 people or 8 people. I know there's a number that is attached
I
to.
believe it's 3 or more.
Yeah,
3 or more?
FBI is 3 or more. Yeah.
Okay, for it to qualify as a mass shooting. But one event of someone trying to use an explosive in their shoe changed how we fly now. But we can't seem to do anything about at least weapons of war. That should be easy, to just take weapons of war off of the streets and say civilians should not have weapons of war, and we can't really seem to do that. So it's depressing. I don't think anything's going to change. We already have heard the senator from Texas, Ted Cruz, has already made his ridiculous comments. So we just sit back and we just watch and we give thoughts and prayers, and then wait for it to happen again. And it's quite depressing.
Commissioner Powell has his hand raised.
Thank you.
Thank you. My condolences go to Officer Terry and his family, as well as the rest of the victims of the shooting in Colorado. And from the perspective of a former explorer, I think it's critical to thank Officer Terry for his service and his selfless action to decide to charge into the line of duty and into the line of fire, leaving behind 7 children after serving on the force there for almost 11 years. In a time where civic engagement is frowned upon and selfishness is an all-time high, I think it's critical to reflect upon the intersectional importance of mental health, gun violence, and militarization of police forces. I think we have to be, after thinking about how we want social workers to respond to a lot of calls, I start to question what an $83,000 a year social worker is going to do to de-escalate that situation. And gun violence is not something unfamiliar to Salt Lake City. One of my peers at the University of Utah was murdered. And race aside in that matter, I believe her story became so widely recognized because she was a student at the U and an athlete, and also a white woman. And to see gun violence strike our own community here in such a tragic way, I think it woke up the community's eyes here locally on the intersectional value of not only race, but also gender, and how we have a lot of gender-based violence. And the intersectional importance to this commission is, what do we do now? Like, how do we act out of due diligence and out of love, but also out of a way that can proactively disencourage any hate crimes or acts of violence in the future? I think we need to be very mindful on the policies we're passing and implementing, especially when it comes to matters such as militarization of police departments and what kind of resources these officers need to respond to these kind of difficult calls. And I don't think there's any amount of training that can ever prepare someone to respond to a scenario like that. I think that it's definitely a character action, and to see someone as brave as Officer Terry arrive to that scene that day, I can understand the framework and the hypocrisy, but I believe that if we give into that sort of energy, we as minorities know that that's not carrying a love-based perspective, and that's polarizing someone's death and situation. And I would say that any police officer that we've worked with thus far has told me what happened to George Floyd was extremely inappropriate. And I believe we should actively advocate to make sure that our peace and police officers are safe and respected for as well, especially after they lose their life in the line of duty. So thank you, Officer Terry. And thank you to our law enforcement who put their selves in the line of duty every day. We want to meet you at a halfway point.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. Well stated. Any other thoughts before we move on?
I have a thought.
Please.
So, the George Floyd trial starts next week on Monday. Do we know if, I don't know if it's going to happen, but do we know if our officers are prepared if we have another riot after this trial? I mean, it's a high possibility. And how do we prepare them? I mean, it's kind of scary.
I would like to call it maybe protest.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I apologize for that. The protests. But it's highly possible that could be happening throughout the trial, and especially after the trial, that there'll be protests happening. And I'm not sure if our officers are ready for that because of what happened in May, this past May. Any thoughts or?
Well,
I would like to
we do know that they are prepared in Minnesota, but other places I don't know about that. They've put up fences and they've restricted access to the courts and all of that in Minnesota. I don't know what they've done here locally.
Yeah, Officer Grady, I think we cut you off.
Yes, sir. I'm not. Can you see my video? Can
No,
you see
ma'am.
my face at all?
No, ma'am.
I don't know how to.
We
It
could.
lets me turn on my
Yeah.
microphone, but not my video.
Oh, okay.
We started earlier.
Yeah, you were
You
there.
were, yeah, you were there for a minute, Chris.
Oh,
There
there
you
you
are.
are. There you are.
Oh, you can see me now?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Nope.
Just to give a little insight on that, I'm part of our public order unit. And we are preparing for that. We have emails that circulate out. We have a schedule of upcoming protests. Our upper admin is always on top of all of that. As far as the protective order unit, we do train monthly. And it's definitely something that we're keeping a very close eye on, just to kind of ease your worry about that. Like I said, schedules they're actually going to make it aware for the whole department so that we know when these protests are happening. We communicate frequently about what's going on in the city. Our motors and our bikes unit are actually monitoring them more than anyone, but just to kind of ease your mind a little bit, we are preparing for that. We know that they're coming. We have schedules. We're having a pretty big 2-day training for our public order unit. So just so you're aware, we are training and we are preparing and we are watching, and that's on all levels, like communication, along with professionalism, and then also tactically, in case I like to call them protests too, and we do want to defend everyone's rights for their First Amendment, and it's something that we stand by in the highest of regards, because we think that everyone deserves to have that. But we're also got to be ready on both sides, right? So just to kind of ease your mind a little bit, we are preparing for that, and we do communicate frequently about upcoming events.
Thank you, Officer Grady.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your engagement with this. I just thought it was important to provide some space, just because there's so much conversation and so many feelings around what's recently happened. But I appreciate your.
Before moving on, and Reverend Davis has inspired me through his leadership to share this quote. An injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny, or mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And I think that's the perspective we need to carry through this commission of human beings, and that, an act of injustice in any form to any one person can affect us all directly or indirectly. And I would say the way maybe we felt from the response of the media was maybe on purpose. I think the media does that on purpose to trigger and polarize people, especially in times such as now. So thank you for allowing me to share that.
Commissioner Scott has a hand raised.
All right, give me 1 sec. Let me try and figure out here. Okay. Kind of scatterbrained right now. I got a lot of thoughts going on, but I wanted to talk a little bit about what Officer Grady was talking about. I think it kind of brings it back full circle about the issues that are going on today. 1 day of training a month is not enough. And we all know that, especially for situations that happened last year. This brings, like I said, it just goes full circle. The reason there's not enough training is because there's not enough officers. The reason there's not enough officers is because nobody wants to be an officer. The reason that nobody wants to be an officer is because of the political environment. And the reason because there's bad officers is because there's not enough training. Or let me rephrase that. The reason because there's bad officers is because their police departments are not getting the type of officers that can apply the training that we receive. It's not that that training's not happening. It's just that they can't apply it. And George, the officer involved in George Floyd's case, is case in point for me. In no training that I've ever received in my career have I ever been taught to put my knee on somebody's neck unless a deadly force situation is necessary. So that said, the issue is that we are not getting quality enough officers because of the standards. Police officers don't make enough. They don't get good enough benefits when it comes to being able to choose a different path. Instead of getting the quality candidates that are college educated and have good social skills and can apply the training, they're deciding to go out and do sales and make $100,000 a year instead of coming to be a police officer, because of why do it? So I think that your question about whether or not we're prepared, I honestly don't think that we will be 100% prepared with the amount of training that we have the ability to conduct. On top of the fact that I don't think we have enough officers that can apply the training we get. I've been in several situations where, and I don't want to toot my own horn. I know I'm not the best officer out there, but I do feel I have the ability to make good decisions in stressful situations and apply the training. And because of that, I haven't been involved, knock on wood, in any critical incidents because I was able to, with the assistance of other officers that were also able to apply the training around me. So I'm sure that's a lot of thought in altogether, but that's my perspective on whether or not we're prepared. I don't think we are. We don't have the officers that can apply the training, and that again goes full circle. So
Thank you, so Officer Scott. I truly appreciate that honesty of emotion and where you are and where you think the department is. It's truly much appreciated that you would speak that truth. So I appreciate that.
Dante, do you mind if I make a couple of comments?
Please.
A little overwhelmed here. A little emotional in my comments. But I work with a lot of officers run towards harm, run towards danger, try to protect the community. And even been there when we buried my colleagues. Some I knew well, some I didn't know very well. Something special to me about someone who puts their life on the line towards danger. I think it's important to acknowledge that. Not more important in the community. Not more important than the other deaths that we're talking about that so many of you referenced today in those perspectives. And so listening to the conversation, the retired police officer perspective went to the officer that was killed in Boulder. And no way do I diminish the other. And I appreciate community members who talked about their experience and their perspective. And it just goes to the gap in how we're looking at this, because I don't think either side is wrong by any means, but we have to come together and figure out how to do that. And I think it takes all of us to do it. And then we're talking about the protests, right? And had an opportunity to speak with a number of officers. Crystal Grady happens to be my partner in the partner care program. We had a healthy, long dialogue. I've talked to a lot of other officers, and I want to share thoughts attributed to anybody because I want to respect their privacy and to speak for themselves. But in the conversations I've had with officers about protests over the summer and the officers standing on the line, having people yell hateful things at them while they're trying to defend the rights of people to give free speech. And for many of them, the takeaway was we have to come together to work together better as a community. right? And that was really inspiring for me, that instead of retreating and internalizing that anger and pushing back against community, which often happens in law enforcement, quite frankly, my hat was off to the officers in Salt Lake City, recognized this as a failure of our community and our police department to effectively work together, so we got to this point, and it motivated them to be part of it. And so I've been challenging those officers to please come to our meetings, come show up. It's been made clear that not everyone on the commission wants to engage with law enforcement, but we need that perspective. And I think Brendan and Crystal just said is important for us as a commission to hear. And I think as importantly, comments that you all made, law enforcement needs to hear that, and we have to listen without being defensive and saying, no, that's not the case, or we don't understand, etc. Because in some ways we don't understand, but it doesn't make it not true. So we have to be able to work together. So I'm going to suggest again, I beseech colleagues on the commission, please engage with my colleagues in law enforcement so we can understand each other's perspectives in a deep and healthy way, because I think it'll result in better outcomes from this commission if we do that. And I know that we haven't been strictly on the agenda today. In a few minutes, we'll get to the partner pair program actually on the agenda. I understand there are a lot of reasons why commissioners may not want to engage with law enforcement, but if I can help be part of the solution to be able to create that engagement, to meet in small groups, or I be an advocate either to support if you're feeling afraid, or to help facilitate that conversation, because I really think our path forward is through that dialogue. And I think it's going around in a circle here, but I admire my colleagues on this commission because you say things that strike me in my heart as true, and I feel empathy and awareness in a way that even though I try to be open to it, I can't unless you tell me. I think it's important for our officers to hear that from your perspective. I think our officers also have a perspective to share back with you. Please, let's humanize each other. Please, let's come together. I'm sad for that officer that was killed. My wife, I'm so glad you're retired. About your age. Did my duty and I get to move on, and there's lots of people still doing it, and I appreciate them for that. But we need to do better, and I think by talking to each other we can get there. So I'll sign off, but please let's keep those channels open. Please let's seek those opportunities. And Dante, thank you for facilitating this very helpful conversation as we start.
Thank you, Commissioner. As always, your passion and truth speak loudly, and I think are felt by all. And so truly much appreciate your engagement. Did I cut someone off?
Yes. No. Thank you. Thank you for that. I believe I needed to hear what you said. I do agree with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Who was that?
My video working?
No.
No, ma'am, but go ahead.
Okay, I just need everybody on here to know that I do this for you. I was there for the riots. I was injured, and I did it for the community. I love all of you. That's why I took this job. I was assaulted in every way possible. And I had a female show me grace in that moment and remind me of the community and why I was there. And just so you know, most officers, 99% of them that I talk to, do this because they want to make a difference in people's lives. They want to show up and be there for people on their worst days so that the people that are having their good days can have them. So I just need you guys to know that I'm here for you. The only way we can get through this is together. And I'm open to communicating in whatever way I can. But I'm very passionate about the community. I'm working on things to make the police relationships better. And I just want you to know that I did this job for the community. That's why I wake up every day. You're my motivation, your safety, you going home at night and having your dinner. The young woman that was speaking in the car earlier, she said she's afraid to go out. Well, that's what I want to do, is make it okay for you to feel safe in going out. And for me, I see souls. I don't see color of skin. I'm not responding for this, that, or that. I'm responding because you're my community and I love you. I just needed you guys to hear that and let you know that that's why I'm here. And I will continue fighting for that.
Thank you, Officer Grady,
Thank
for
you.
your commitment and passion to do the work, and for standing a post for everybody here. And we wish you continued safety at the very least. So thank you. Okay. Just trying to slowly move into the next agenda item after that conversation, but I truly appreciate everyone participating in that, either listening or speaking. I think it was an important opportunity to really share why we're all here and what we all hope for. The next conversation is just about commission members and the opening, and hopefully you've all received and had a chance to review the emails that were going back and forth. Thank you, Cindy Lou, for that clarification. Coletta for sending that as well. So I will pause. Larry was going to kind of walk us through where we might be able to get to in regard to filling or not filling that slot right now.
Yeah, thanks, Dante. So just for awareness, I will put up on the screen for a moment, if I have screen share, and I do, the memo that outlines this topic related to filling a vacancy. So as you can see on the screen, and for the public's benefit, there are 21 commission members, of which 6 are considered core, 13 others, and then of the 8 youth subcommittee members, 2 are in voting roles on the commission, and they rotate. That was adjusted to 3 in October. You see a timeline here that shows you the resignation and replacements that have taken place. And as you'll see at the bottom, after Commissioner Batar resigned, Commissioner Ahmad took on a core commissioner role, but leaves a vacancy on the commission as a whole. It should go without saying, but I think it's important to mention that this topic has been a part of several agendas of this commission and has not, gotten a whole lot of attention. And I'm not saying that in judgment, I'm saying that just as an empirical fact. And so I think it's very important for this commission to decide, first of all, whether a new commissioner should be added. At the point that you decide whether one should be added, then I think you decide what type of commissioner you might be looking for, whether it be to represent a particular community in Salt Lake City that feels unrepresented or underrepresented, or whether there might be other criteria. But I think your first gate has to be whether or not a new commissioner should be added to the commission. And again, without judgment, I would say that this commission is in, if you'll not mind a sports analogy, we're kind of in the mid to late third quarter of a 4-quarter game with you all. Not that this is a game, but I think you understand what I mean. And so it certainly would be important, I think, for any new commissioner to join now, or that there not be one, because I think further on it would be hard for that commissioner to have the kind of influence and impact that you would hope a commissioner would have. So, I think it's probably helpful just to get some folks' initial thoughts. I can certainly do a little straw poll to see, how folks feel. Maybe I'll just do that for starters, just to see. And I know that not everybody has video, so if you don't have video, perhaps you can use a Zoom hand or verbally. But this is not a vote. I just am curious, how many folks feel that it is very important for a new commissioner to be appointed.
Might want to unshare just so folks can.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot that I was sharing. Forgive me. So once more, to fill a vacancy, how many folks feel it's important? To fill?
Larry, can I put some context on that?
Please.
So originally, we had 21, so because we thought we were going to have to do the Robert's rules or whatever. And so we wanted to have an odd number, so we wouldn't have ties. And now we don't have that. And so that need to have that odd number, we don't need anymore. However, I was still, probably last week, I was still leaning towards adding somebody because there's some talk about having an Asian American representative because of the Asian American violence that we've been hearing about lately, although it's been happening for a while. And so I was leaning towards that way, but I think I agree with you I was just thinking also this past few days that we are so late in the game. I think this group is really starting to gel better. It takes a while, right, for us to start gelling. And if we bring somebody in, I think the group may suffer a little bit. That person may feel a little bit lost as well. And we're so close towards that end, like you were saying. And so, I think we're looking at the summer, right? That kind of like our first year of being the rep. And so I would like for my feelings would be, why don't we just wait till the end of that year? And then some of y'all are going to be leaving. Some of us, they say, you know what, we're heading out to do other volunteer work, or some of us will stay. And maybe at that time would be a great time to transition and bring other people in or out. And then that group could then continue to mold together. Those are my thoughts. One, I want to give the reason we had 21,
sure.
And then the second part. So
thank you very much, Commissioner Prospero, for that context. And I did see Reverend Davis, but just before I turn to him, I wanted to share that now that our team has squared away some logistics we were working out, we're in a position to schedule and host a number of additional listening sessions with the community. And I would be firmly committed to a listening session that would be particularly focused on the Asian American Pacific Islander community, not simply because of recent events, but just in general, the need for that. Not that that would be in place of adding a commissioner, but I just wanted to make that note. Reverend Davis.
I would be the opposite of Moses's position and prefer that we add another person now, that we tell them that where we are in the process, that they are not blindsided by where we are in the process. And I would think that person ought to come from the Asian or Polynesian part of our community.
Thanks for your viewpoint, Reverend Davis. What are others' thoughts? How do you feel?
I agree that I think someone should come from the Asian community if we're going to bring in a new commission.
I appreciate that, Commissioner Shiflett. And, I know this is tricky because it may seem hard to have an opinion about whether or not a commissioner should be added before thinking about, what community perhaps that commissioner should come from. But I would like to, sort through whether folks feel strongly about adding a commissioner or not, and then subsequently, perhaps how to select that commissioner. Other sentiments from other commissioners.
I was going to say, I agree with Moises. I struggle with keeping up with the commission as it is right now with all the information and everything, and to understand what's going on and to be actually effective to go through everything. And it's very hard to stay focused. I can't imagine somebody coming in and starting at this process. And also for I guess, transparency, I do identify as Asian.
I had that in my mind and was reluctant to ask you, so I appreciate you bringing that up.
I did too.
Yes.
So I apologize for that.
No, and you know, it's so interesting, isn't it, that, you know, I for one find it difficult to always understand the applicable, you know, ethnic, cultural, and racial labels, because of course Asia is a massive continent, so it's hard to, you know, truly understand what we mean. I've heard people say South Asian, I've heard them say Middle Eastern, I've heard them say East Asian. It's deeply complex. But thank you, Commissioner Benuri, very much for that. Any other comments different than what we've heard so far, or perhaps in support of one or the other?
I believe actively trying to reach out to someone in the Pacific Islander community would be, I believe we already have a commissioner here actually who is, never mind, I'll take that back. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, on the youth subcommittee note though, I was looking at that document. We currently have about 4 African-American youth subcommittee members, 4 to 5, and I think we could definitely integrate our approach a little more. So we would appreciate ideas from the older commission members on how we could maybe start reaching out to local schools or something of that nature to maybe get more diverse input, or to allow our youth subcommittee more leeway to maybe do that. I don't know.
I'm having a thought, and I don't know whether this would resonate with others, but, you know, given the fact that the youth subcommittee doesn't expect the same amount of regular attendance from all of its members, perhaps having an Asian American new member of the youth subcommittee might be useful, because that person would only be expected to cover, you know, X number of meetings, not the whole, because of the rotation, but it would still enable it wouldn't necessarily fill the vacancy exactly as prescribed. So I need to give it that caveat, but that just occurred to me as Commissioner Powell was talking. Commissioner Davis?
Well, that would work for me if you wanted to pick a person for the youth committee from the Asian Polynesian community.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis. Commissioner Prospero, I want to honor your take as well and see what your thoughts are on that as a somewhat of an in-between kind of a step.
Sounds good to me.
Other thoughts? Commissioner Antoirden.
I would prefer to wait to fill that position. The honor aid in this country right now directed towards Asian Americans. I don't want to diminish that. Functionally, as commission, had so many starts and stops and new introductions. And we're so close to the end of the year when there likely will be a restructure. My recommendation is to just wait. We're just barely getting to know each other and hitting our stride. And my thought is let's wait. I absolutely support that idea. Thank you, Commissioner Powell, for on the youth subcommittee, and I think they're actively anyway. I think there's a lot of value in that. I think we can meet our charter with the group that we have, and then reevaluate in a couple of months.
Right.
I think we're just getting going on recommendations. I think it makes sense to wait from a functional standpoint.
So if I may, what I'm hearing is, you know, we have a solid group here of commissioners, and that perhaps if the youth subcommittee were to incorporate a member from the Asian American Pacific Islander community who might, you know, rotate in occasionally to join meetings, that would satisfy the interests of some who wanted to add a new member while perhaps minimizing any sort of chemistry issue or, you know, other challenge. So with that summary, I just want to see if folks are okay with that, and if anybody has any strong feeling one way or the other. So I'm going to take from that this commission will choose not to appoint a formal new member to fill a commission vacancy, but that Commissioner Powell and his youth subcommittee will look for a new member that would be drawn from the Asian American Pacific Islander community, who would then pay occasional visits to this commission. Commissioner Powell, does that sound okay?
Yes, even if it's temporary, I just believe we need to integrate some active advocacy from that demographic because shootings are actively going on.
Much appreciated. And thank you all for the thoughtful discussion. And I think I can turn it back over to Dante.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, commissioners, for reaching that consensus. I want to move to just a comment on the Partner Pair program with respect to all the work Coletta's been doing on this, as well as the officers themselves and Lieutenant Zayas. Let me pause. Commissioner Kaili has a comment. The mic is not working, but there are 3 of us on the commission that represent the Pacific Islander community. So thank you, Commissioner, for that confirmation or clarification. To the Partner Pair program, and certainly with respect to Commissioner Andrew Reardon's comments and his beseeching of each of you to engage with each other as it relates to police officers and commissioners. There's been this conversation and the effort to have people sign up who want to sign up to the Partner Pair program for, I don't know, at least a couple of weeks now, if not more. And some of the individuals who have signed up have also stated that they wanted to engage with more than one officer if that's a possibility. And so Coletta's been holding off on that to ensure that everyone who wants to participate can do so and have their officer, but be able to engage with an individual officer to do that. That said, we've got to close this off and close it up so that she can best expedite the efficiency of this project, this program. And so if by tomorrow, I think Coletta, tell me if that doesn't work, but if she has not heard from anyone else by tomorrow close of business who wants to participate, who has not said they want to right now, then basically time's up, and she will allow other individuals or individuals to then partner with more than one officer and not be able to really take in anyone else to then add to that program. So I just want to be clear, if you want to and have not signed up for the Partner Pair program, do so by contacting Coletta Lynch by tomorrow at 5 o'clock, or the door to that will be closed. Am I stating that fairly correctly, Coletta?
Thank you, Dante. That's accurate. And I will send out a reminder tonight just to let everyone know which officers are left on the list that have not been selected, but that time frame works perfectly. Thank you, Dante.
Great, thank you.
Dante.
Yes.
Could I challenge everyone to sign up for that? This is Officer Grady. I think to support the education on both sides, this is a huge opportunity for both police and commissioners, and to engage in that education on both sides, because we definitely can learn from each other, and the only way to do that is to communicate. So I'm just going to send out a challenge to all of you that are on the fence about it, unsure about it. The only way to communicate better is to engage in these types of things. So that's my challenge to y'all.
Thank you, Officer Grady. Much appreciated. I'm sure someone will pick up that challenge.
I'd like to accept her challenge right now. Coletta, would you be willing to sign me up to partner with Crystal Grady for the Public Order Unit?
Yes, I'd be willing to sign you up, Commissioner. Officer Grady, unfortunately, already has a pair. Could I sign you up with someone else if that's okay?
That I'm more than welcome to do that. I would also like to emphasize the participation for the public order segment, as I was one of the demonstrators actively protesting during the summer.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. I will definitely get with you one-on-one and get you the best fit.
He can call me anytime as well. I'm
Thank
okay with
you.
that.
Appreciate
Hey,
it.
I was just going to say, Crystal is my partner. But
I'll steal it from you, Steve.
I'd love to engage in that conversation with all three of you. I think that'd be a really healthy discussion.
There's a certain high school dance kind of energy that I'm getting.
Thank you. I feel like an auctioneer going once. Going
MJ,
twice.
thanks for making me feel so much better. I was feeling a little down, so thanks for that.
You're good. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your passion.
All right, excellent, excellent. Just want to pause and see if there's any public comment.
Not at this time, although as we often do, we have Beverly Hawkins on Zoom, and just want to acknowledge her and see if there's anything that she wanted to add as a public comment.
Thank you. Ms. Hawkins?
Yes, I would like to. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, good. I do have a question, but first I'd just like to offer some comments that are generated from the early part of this meeting's discussion. I was very supportive of the protests that took place through last summer. And I believe that in some part, they probably led to the development of this commission. My family and I did watch the live coverage of that first night of the protests for 5 hours straight. And at the end of that, in addition to supporting the right to protest, I was very impressed with the restraint shown by the police officers. But maybe more importantly, I also noticed that at 2 different times, news coverage showed that when protesters needed help, their instinct was still to turn to law enforcement to seek that help. And I found that reassuring because that even while people were protesting law enforcement in general, it appeared that they trusted the local officers to ask for their help. And I was heartened by that. Now, that was my personal comment. That said, as an observer for the League of Women Voters, I would like your guidance on, I report to my league colleagues of these meetings, but I'd like your guidance on what point I should encourage them to get involved to give feedback to the city council and the mayor's office. Is it too soon, or as the recommendations from each subcommittee go through, should people be making comments? I'd like some help on that.
Commissioners, if you wouldn't mind, I just wanted to briefly speak to that because I would highly encourage Beverly, you to circulate the web forum that we have provided to the public. Includes the text message and telephone options for those who'd rather use that. But it's the slcrepcommission.com site, because that is meant to serve as a hub for collecting all public input associated with the commission's work. It will stay open for the life of the commission, perhaps even beyond this summer. And so from my perspective, as the person who's trying to help the commission with community listening and public input, I would love for that to be a resource that you all draw upon.
And I have, but that's a good reminder to continue doing it on a periodic basis. But then even as the recommendations make it to the city council and the mayor, is that the time also that you want to hear from people, or you encourage people to respond?
I see a city staffer willing to step up. Lahua?
Hi, yes, thank you. I think anytime that you're ready to share comments or feedback or observations on any of these topics, the city council would be interested, and I can post in the chat what the best ways are to submit those comments and the page to be notified when the council is meeting. And I fully assume someone, Coletta or someone from the mayor's office might speak up too, but I'll just say on their behalf that my understanding is that Mayor Mendenhall and her staff are also eager to hear any feedback at any point along the way.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks.
And that is accurate, Lahua. Thank you so much. The mayor is also eager to receive any feedback from the public, so please feel free to send that. The best way to send it because I also help in checking the REP commission box. So if you could send that through the REP commission at slcgov.com, I will definitely relay your message and any comments that you send to the mayor.
Great. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. And I would also add that right now is consideration of budget concerns and budget appropriations right this very moment. So I don't think you're at all out of step with timing of when to offer your comments as it relates to some of the recommendations of the commission.
Very good. Thanks.
Okay. I want to skip to, if I can, a couple of the subcommittee reports. Specifically, I want to start with the School Safety Subcommittee. Last time it presented its recommendations, and since that time, it has made additions or amendments or edits to those recommendations. And so want to provide this opportunity so those can move forward as expeditiously as possible. So why don't we just skip to that? It's item number 7 on the agenda, School Safety Subcommittee and its draft recommendations. So Siobhan?
Yeah. While I pull up that document, I just want to frame this conversation. You heard from us at the last full commission meeting, as Dante mentioned, and we brought you some recommendations. You gave us the opportunity to move those forward. We have had some subsequent conversations that have caused some adjustments to those. And so I won't go through all of the recommendations, just the adjustments. And for now, I think we'll pass them through as, you know, for your thoughts. And unless my commission members want to tell me, my subcommittee members want to tell me differently, and we want comment from the group. But for now, I will just present them to you, and then I will ask my subcommittee members to speak up on what action they might want you to take. So am I going to be able to share my screen here? Yes. Okay. Wonderful. Okay. So if you recall, we shared with you some recommendations about the Promising Youth project. Am I getting that right? And once we presented them to this group, we learned some things that were in process, or some complications with some of those things we recommended. And so we've amended, we haven't changed our recommendations, but we have amended them to be considerate of what we learned. So I'll run those through. We talked about moving the Promising Youth project under the city umbrella to adjust for some difficulties in recruiting and in working with recruiting staff and in working with youth directly. In our subsequent meeting with the PD, we learned that that could threaten some of their funding sources, that their current funding sources, including a COPS grant that they have that funds the program. They also feel like the program is pretty young, and they want a little more opportunity to have it flourish under their oversight. We do, along with that, along with acknowledging that, we recommend that we'd like to have that decision be revisited to make sure that everything that's in process right now is actually effective in helping that program to flourish. So we've talked about whether it would be right to do 8 months or a year, depending on when they're funding. And so we will perhaps adjust that 1 year to 8 months if that's more appropriate to the funding source. That's a piece of information we're still waiting for. We talked about needing to make sure that the program had appropriate resources and space to exist. We have learned that they've found a way to do that. And so we just wanted to memorialize that here, that for the moment, they're going to be housed with the SROs in the individual schools, which we've been told will help to improve the SRO relationships with their staff and will help actually improve some of the services they're providing to students. So we're appreciative that that's going forward, but wanted to acknowledge that in our recommendation, just to say that that's what we learned. And then we do want to reiterate the current grant funding is in place for the coming year, but want to be very clear that we do think that securing long-term funding for the program, including it into a budget, is going to be appropriate for that in our opinions, so in the group's opinions. So And then lastly, we had, not lastly, second to lastly, we had learned from our SRO participants in our subcommittee meeting that they get to follow the students from the Promising Youth Project all during the school year, but because of policies or funding that they weren't able to follow those students through the summer, that only a few officers based on seniority were able to do that. And we got a clarification that actually that funding has changed very recently, and now it's our understanding that they are able to participate through the summer. So that is new news that we added and memorialized here. And lastly, we had a recommendation early on in our draft recommendations. You heard, not this past meeting, but in a prior meeting, that we've held on to just to understand a couple of things, but we are ready to move that forward a bit. We recommended a full-time employee to address in the mayor's office to address equity in education, doing things like tracking the MOU, developing programming needed to make programs for youth more effective, maintain good working relationships between the school district and the city. So we have been made aware that there's a new chief equity officer being recruited at the city level, and that there's others on the staff with responsibilities in that realm. But we do still feel like making it a dedicated position would demonstrate the value that the city has on equity in education, and would also, it's difficult to get that done and to put focus on it if it's part of a larger job description. So we still suggest this full-time employee, but we also suggest that if it is moved forward, that the job description would be jointly arrived on with, you know, some collaboration between the city, the school district, and the police department to make that position set up for success and empowered to make meaningful change, and not just kind of a position that in some cases would just show up to meetings and things like that, but actually has is imbued with some power to and make some changes. So with that, I'd invite questions or comments from my subcommittee members on any of those, or anyone.
On the budget item, do you have a number for that budget item? I think it was your third recommendation.
To make sure that the funding for the Promising Youth Project get determined long-term. No, right. that is a future request. As right now, that program has funding, it has grant funding, but our recommendation is simply that it be moved, that program not be funded through grants long-term, and that it be moved into a budget when their current funding runs out. We do not have a number tied to that, but I'm sure Ashley Fletcher, who is the lead of that program, would be able to drum that up for us pretty quickly. So we don't have a dollar amount right now to answer your question. Other questions or comments?
A quick question. Would that position between the school district and the city be a civilian position, non-police officer?
Yeah, we're suggesting it be in the mayor's office, but only that the job description be collaboratively arrived upon so that it can be a position that's useful to all. Okay, so with that, I will look at my subcommittee members and see, are we seeking action on this today from the full commission, or would we like to hold off and wait until the next full commission meeting?
Seek action if we can.
All right, and you gave us permission to move it forward last time. We're just looking for newly renewed action to make sure that with these addendums and with these adjustments that you're still okay with us moving these forward.
Is there anyone opposed to the adjustments to these recommendations and moving them forward once they have been finalized by the subcommittee?
The subcommittee is also in full support of it.
Are you saying recommend them to the commission and the mayor? Is that what moving forward means?
Yes, that would be, once we have the document finalized, that's what I would see as the next step would be to bring them in front of the council and mayor. And then, sorry, MJ, you were also saying something at the same time.
All right, synchronicity with my mentor. I said the youth subcommittee is in full support of it as well, if that has any quarrel.
It does. It does. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. The next set of recommendations will be moving forward to City Council and the mayor in short order then. Thank you.
Can we celebrate that some way? It's so anticlimactic having a vote by silence. I just want to acknowledge how awesome it is that we have tweaked the second set of recommendations that are moving forward. I think it's good work by this commission, and I think it should be celebrated. So I'm going to thumbs up celebration.
I agree.
Party at Steve's house.
It's social distancing, so we'll have to be in the yard, but that's
excellent. But truly, thank you. It does seem kind of anticlimactic when it's a consensus. Nobody speaks against it. So appreciate that sentiment, Commissioner. Next, the Policies and Practice Subcommittee. Any particular report on some of the data that you're looking at or getting close to recommendations?
Yeah, I can report on that. Thanks, Dante. Siobhan mentioned something that resonated, and that's learning. So between her first set of recommendations and what we just looked at, she mentioned that she learned of ... That's been our experience between each and every meeting. We've had a couple great meetings in the last couple of weeks and honed in on a couple categories or buckets, you could say, and have received other data information at last week's meeting, both from the city regarding a report and some research they did a year ago, and then from the work Commissioner Prospero is doing, and I think he'll talk about here in a minute, from the literature review, and then with sharing some other data. So our buckets are, and what we're focusing in on next Wednesday, are really looking at mental health and resources to respond to calls, as we've talked about early, and to kick off this call, the support and resources for routing and responding to calls, particularly looking at the recommendations around the development of collaboration and connection of relationships between SLC PD and mental health and social service organizations, how best to respond to calls. Related to that is, and what the city provided data to us on, is a co-response program, or how to introduce mental health clinicians and social workers into the city's crisis response system. Third bucket would be related to the body-worn camera ordinance. We've had great dialogue in the subcommittee with chief and assistant chief and officers on that ordinance, and what it means, and are looking to move that forward and have a review and response to the full commission next meeting. Fourth, that we came up with and will pass on to Dante's subcommittee, is a recommendation that training on the history of policing be provided, and we'll let them develop that out. And then fifth has been on ongoing discussions, specific recommendations related to use of force. And so again, we'll have a meeting on Wednesday. I sent material out to the subcommittee last week for our meeting on Wednesday. Additional information that the city provided on that same day. I'd asked the subcommittee that wasn't able to attend, and those that were able to attend, please review that information, the research that the city provided related to the mental health response programs, and come prepared. I'll send additional information out in addition to that was sent out last week tomorrow.
Thank you, sir. lots of work going on. And as far as the training subcommittee, a few things. We have been looking at the efforts of, or the lack of presence of a full-time recruiter. There is a recruiter, but there is no full-time recruiter, and the budget is minimal, certainly as it relates to engagement out of the state of Utah. And so looking at what that budget is and the opportunity for engagement of a full-time recruiter. Looking at the hiring process specifically, and the committee was kind of struck by the number that 50% of all candidates do not pass the background process, and what that looks like, what some of that criteria are. We'll be hopefully hearing from soon one of the person who heads the background investigators, who is on a committee, Sergeant, is it Givens, I believe, and so is going to come in and speak with us about that criteria. The criteria, it comes from Post, and so it's a statewide criteria that Salt Lake City has little ability to influence at this point, or certainly that's the floor under which they have to work. Also, conversations around the Civilian Police Academy and that content, the curriculum, and those trainers. And also learned, I think, to everyone's appreciation, that the name of that will change in recognition of some of the engagement that happens with our refugee and immigrant communities, very specifically. And how do you have a citizens, I think I said civilian, but citizens academy, when you're engaging with folks who aren't, nor maybe even ever want to be a citizen, but they are here engaging with the city and its police department. And so the name of that academy, the Citizens Academy, will be changing. I don't think we heard to what, but that will be changing. And so those are probably the three big picture things that we are focusing on at this point. Anything I've missed, training subcommittee members?
Nope.
Okay, thank you for that. So going back up to the agenda, I'm sorry, yeah, no, not back up yet. So any report from the youth subcommittee on its continuing work?
I'll let Moises, maybe if he happened to attend the last meeting. I had a friend pass away, a fellow activist, this last week.
Sorry to hear that. Commissioner Prospero, any thoughts or presentation?
No. One of the thoughts was we had discussed that the youth subcommittee was kind of feeling the pressure of them having to come up with their own recommendations, which would be great. But I have informed them that they don't have to have their own specific recommendations from the youth subcommittee. The work that they're doing in our other subcommittees is great, and so I know they're putting a lot of pressure on them. Again, it would be great if they can, but that youth voice is being heard in all our other subcommittees. So that was one of the main things I want to bring up.
Great, thank you. Going back up to, I think it's number 3 agenda item, the second bullet point, and maybe one of the city staff or Colette or Cindy Lou would like to comment on the opportunity to meet with Matrix Consulting, once again, the budget consultant that's working with the city council on the police department's budget. So the opportunity that may exist for a presentation by Matrix once again. Cindy Lou or Coletta?
Yes, I'm here. So we have scheduled for Matrix to come and present their final recommendations and their audit findings on April the 21st. But in the interim, they would like to schedule a meeting with you all if you would like to meet with them. And so you will get a doodle poll today. They've outlined some times that they're available, and I'm going to send them out to you all in a doodle poll to see when all of you are available and what's the best time. We can also do a split meeting, kind of like what we did with the safety update, in order to do multiple meetings for you all. So please look out for that doodle poll and let us know what times work best. Also, I want to defer to the city council staff to see if I missed anything or they have any additional information they'd like to provide.
No, I think that was perfect. Thank you so much, Coletta.
Great, thank you both. And again, just a reminder of the opportunity to attend city council work sessions on Tuesdays. Typically they run between 2 and 5 p.m. And the next few upcoming are April 6th, April 13th, and April 20th. So maybe within the subcommittees, if there's an interest in a brief engagement, whether it's with recommendations or not completed, might still be an opportunity to share some of the work, the ongoing work of your subcommittee or the full commission in general. So just being aware of those dates and times, and I would suggest that the facilitators can once again remind and see if there's an interest in any of you participating on any of those dates and times. There's a standing time set aside at the work session to hear from the commission on its work. So it's not a special engagement, it's a standing item on their agenda. So they encourage and would love to hear as much and as often as possible from this commission. And so just offer a reminder that that is there and available. Okay. Going down, since we postponed this a couple times, I don't want Commissioner Prospero to get his feelings hurt. Going down to item number 6, on some literature review on best practices around the country of commissions like this or work in this regard as it relates to police reform, police accountability. So I will pause for Commissioner Prospero and see if he's prepared to offer his literature review on best practices.
Well, I was going to talk about 8, but I guess I'll only talk about 1 because I get the hint, Dante. And actually, the one I will talk about because it was brought up with the policy folk, and I'll try to go fast, and hopefully this sharing thing will work. Can y'all see that? Yes, in English. Oh, in francés. Okay. So it's about the cahoots. Can y'all see that? This is for Steve. This is for Steve. There you go. Can you see it now, Steve? Good.
And I like it when we were picking on you, but I'll take my turn. Yes, I can read it. Thank you.
Okay, so this is about the cahoots. Weird name, but it basically stands for Crisis Assistance, helping out on the streets. It's a 24/7 mobile crisis intervention program in Eugene, Springfield metro area that's been around for over 30 years. This is not in the police department. It is under a community organization called Whitebird Clinic, which provides healthcare, mental health care, housing. It's just a variety of program that it provides. Cahoots is one of those programs. It works in 2-person teams, a medic, and basically a crisis worker, a social worker, mental health provider, somebody that's able to work in crisis situations. They themselves are not law enforcement, so there's not a law enforcement person in the team. Again, it's the medic and the mental health provider. They don't carry weapons. This is all about nonviolent conflict resolution. They are dispatched, and this is the big piece, is that they're dispatched through either, because they work through Eugene and Springfield, they'll go through the Eugene Police Fire Ambulance Communications, or through the Springfield non-emergency number. The dispatchers are trained to triage those calls. And so they'll recognize, oh, you know what, this seems like it's nonviolent. There's some behavioral issues. Let's call cahoots. Sometimes they'll say, you know what, send them both. There may be some violence, but so send law enforcement, but it may be once they get there that the mental health professional, the paramedic, they could really take over better, and then police could stay back, or after there's some encounter with law enforcement, then paramedics could go in and work. But there's also, again, one of the sections where it's just cahoots. They go all by themselves. So again, they go there. stabilize some mental health or medical health issues. But these are the variety of services they provide: crisis counseling, suicide prevention, grief, loss, substance, housing, a lot of resource connection. You go there, there's a person that's struggling. Hey, you know what? We got a referral, and they could provide transport for this person. They provide some advocacy, like for the homeless, mental health, and so forth and so on. Well, what kind of impact do they have? So Cahoots is funded through the city, and then it's funneled that money through the Eugene Police Department, EPD. Again, it started a long time ago, but in 2017 to 2018, they were running more or less $800,000, funding 31 hours a day. So there's some overlap. They cover for the overlap. So some folks, the team will stay for a little bit longer while the other one comes in, and then they both have individual vans too. So in case one has to take off and something happens, they still have another van to be able to cover for that. I'm a little bit confused with some of the information they give out there, because the latest one now is saying that it's a $2.1 million annual budget. The Eugene and Springfield Police Departments go at 90 million, so they try to show the differences. You know, one's 90 million, the other one's only 2 million. Cost savings, again, here's depends on the numbers that you look at. Cahoots, the organization itself, estimate that they saved the city of Eugene approximately $8.5 million. But they include all the calls that Cahoots goes to, which includes when they go with law enforcement or with fire or anybody. The Eugene Police Department made their own analysis, looking at only when Cahoots goes by themselves, when in situations where they would have called police, but they didn't. So in general, we would have called the police, but because we have Cahoots, we don't call them, and they go by themselves. They like to look at that better. And that is more of a purist view of the cost savings. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Reasons. So these are the main reasons they go to. These are the top three. Welfare check. It may be, hey, you know what? We've seen this person. They've been laying there for 5 hours. Nobody's moved. We're worried. They'll call Cahoots in. Check them out. So you can imagine somebody's intoxicated, somebody's homeless, so forth. Public assistance. Again, that kind of I'm having some kind of mental breakdown, and so I may need some counseling to help out. The transport is I need to get. It's usually for homeless. I need to get to this place to get some services, because if I don't, I'm not going to get my medication, and then there'll be some crises, and then there's the rest of this, right? These are the ones that Cahoots really goes often just by themselves. A lot of these law enforcement will end up going, or Cahoots goes, and then they show up and say, whoa, you know what? I think we should call law enforcement because there's a safety issue, there's violence involved. And in those, oftentimes it's when it's like a criminal trespass. Oh, we found somebody here in our backyard. Oh, no problem, we'll bring them out. Probably somebody's intoxicated. Uh-oh, they have a knife. We're backing up, now we'll call police. So their numbers have doubled between 2014 2019. One of the main things I would really like to talk about here is this part here. This is really the part that really diverts police calls for service. We would have called police if Cahoots did not exist, but they do exist, so therefore we're not going to use the police. We're going to send Cahoots. And then out of all those times that they actually just go, only 2% of those times did they actually call police to come and help them, which for me shows that dispatch is doing a great job. Right? They're really being able to triage, which also means that dispatch needs a lot of training to be able to do that, to be able to assess when to send Cahoots, when to send law enforcement only, when to send both at the same time. So that's Cahoots in a quick and dirty way. They have a lot of information. There's been some good analyses on this. I won't show all of that, but it just so happens that this year there's legislation passed that EMS need to be trained in mental health conditions, right, to get some skills. The specifics are a little broad right now. I'm still trying to figure that out. But that's odd, because then there'll be a EMS person that has mental health training. So that could be one person that can have both of those skills. And if we were to think about bringing something like Cahoots in here, how would that look like when it works with our Salt Lake City Police Department, the CIT team, the one that we had just talked about and provided recommendations on? And they also have hosts, which is the homeless initiatives, where law enforcement and social workers go out and work with homeless. Yeah, how does that work? Is it a third team now, or is it a combination? Put an EMS mental health worker in here with CIT, and they're the group, or what does that look like? So something to consider. So with that, I will end, because I don't want el señor Jaime to get mad at me. Thank you.
Gracias, señor.
I was going to try to catch you before you cleared the screen roll, but looked like there was a lot of crossover on the calls that respond to, and the kinds of calls that Chief Brown has talked about in the past that come up regularly in their top 5 calls.
These here?
Yeah. So that check the welfare, the public assist, talked about an unwanted person and criminal trespass, intoxication. I think those are the top 5. And I'm going off memory, so don't look at that. But looks like there could be some really important crossover here, where we could be freeing up those patrol officers to handle some of the other 20, 30, 40 calls that are holding. So anyway, that confluence of the kind of calls that they go on and the most frequent calls that come up in Salt Lake City seems like a lot of crossover. So there might be some potential.
Yeah, and when they brought in this program, it was seen as a community policing initiative. So like that, there could be avoid some of these negative interactions, right? Something like this, where we could just have civilians take care of it, because if there's somebody that has a weapon and things go bad, meaning the officer, then there may be a violent interaction. So this team is very well trained in dealing with these crises, and what I've heard and read is that officers love this, because they don't have to deal with a lot of this stuff either. And again, they could focus more on traditional crime.
Thank you. Other questions, thoughts?
Question.
Yes, sir.
The numbers double between 2014 and 2019. Did the staff also double?
No, actually, what I think it's right here. What they said is when it first started, I don't know where it's at. When it first started, there wasn't enough coverage. And so then they started to have to, they realized there was gaps in the coverages. And so then once they started to cover, then that's where the funding went up. Now I know what you're asking about the numbers of groups. No, they haven't. As far as I know, as far as I've been able to read, apparently they're not, but it may have been that by increasing that coverage and reducing those gaps, that they're able to cover that. Now, if that continues, I don't know if they'll be able to stay with those teams of 2. I don't know how many teams of 2 there are. There must be quite a few to be able to cover 31 hours.
Thank you. Other questions?
I'll just comment. Due to Commissioner Prospero's research and it being aligned with the direction the Policy and Procedure Subcommittee is moving, he has been recruited to the subcommittee and will be resigning from your subcommittee immediately, Dante.
Hallelujah.
Unfortunately, Dante, he'll have to resign from school safety and not training. So
Gotcha.
he'll be in your group, but not.
All right.
Siobhan is happy.
Thank you.
No comment.
Yeah, I'll also add to that, joking aside, again, as I mentioned earlier, the city did some great research into cahoots a year ago. Looking at the date, I believe July last year, and provided that data. And so I can see the city had worked on this. Commissioner Prospero had worked on it, and our subcommittee had uncovered it. And so I think it's worth our time to pursue it. And I appreciate the presentation, Commissioner Prospero, and would be interested to hear just briefly the full commission's response to it and if they feel it's a worthy pursuit.
Yeah, and just so y'all know, they're really open. Like EPD has this report that they put out that just has all kinds of numbers that you could just get lost in. They also have kind of like their contract that they have, the city with Whitebird Link, something that you can use as a template to move forward, and what would that look like financially. So they're pretty transparent, and so like that doesn't mean you want to go with it. You can look at the information and decide yay, nay, or bits and parts of it. So yeah, what does everybody else think or thoughts?
Just a quick question. I know this is one that's been talked about a good bit. How many others have you seen or researched? I know there was one in Denver, the STAR program, and others. How many do you have information on that are essentially similar approaches to reducing the specific work of police officers and placing that work other places?
When I first started out, I was reviewing quite a few, just an overview of them. Yeah. And they just all seem very similar, very similar. And so I decided to go deeper with Cahoots because they have a lot of information that the other ones don't. They'll have, so it's a general thing there, but they are all very similar. The common theme is it does reduce what I would call negative interactions between law enforcement and community with these type of nonviolent issues that are out there. And therefore, for me, reducing issues that may happen. And then also that PD really likes him, the chiefs as well as the line folk. They're like, hey, if I don't have to deal with that Mo that's always naked in the middle of the street, I just don't know what else to do with him because I don't have those skills. But somebody can come over here and help me out while I'm having an episode. That's a lot better because those people have the skills. So that's kind of the common theme. But again, I went with Cahoots because one, they've been 31 years they've been doing this. That's a long time. Yeah. And they're very transparent on what they have, including the PD. So PD does their own analysis, and then Cahoots does their own stuff as well.
Yeah, and just to add to that, what Commissioner Prospero mentioned, we both came across that, and the city did in their independent research. I was unaware of until last week, Dante. Additionally, I came across several others. The city had also identified in their research, primarily Houston's crisis call diversion program, Denver's pilot STAR program, New York City Well program, and Georgia Crisis and Access Line program.
Okay. Maybe I can suggest this, that it might be something that the commission as a whole can consider, whether it's Cahoots or something similar, but a general recommendation could be to implement something like this as it relates to now an evaluation of the police department's budget and budgets in general, that there could be a general recommendation that Salt Lake City consider, or not even consider, implement a program similar to this in order to, one, I think, better address police calls and police interactions that they don't necessarily want to do, to your point, in the first place, but they don't need a uniformed officer to be there in the first place. So maybe as a general talking point, I would ask Commission its thoughts on making a kind of a general recommendation without saying you need to implement this at this way for this dollar amount, which is a lot of detail that I don't think anybody has the time, effort, or expertise to really dig into, but maybe a broader recommendation. So I'll just pause with that, and maybe if you can unshare the screen, Commissioner Prospero, so folks can see each other. You can turn your screen off, but otherwise everybody else.
I'm oppositional defiant.
Yeah, he is.
Okay. But just as a general thought, I would ask the commissioner's thoughts on making a somewhat general / specific recommendation on a type of program to implement.
Dante, I personally think this is something we should explore.
Yeah.
I would like to speak. Jessica Waters, is she the?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. I'd like to bring her into the conversation, and I think that some of the key areas that, quite frankly, Lieutenant Suarez has brought up before that dovetail with is the importance of training with dispatch. So I don't know how much overlap we've had with those folks, but I'd love to bring them into the conversation. So I'm way in favor of looking at this. Actually, and I also want to look at that new EMS law and the intersection of those medics as first responders on mental health calls as well. I don't know, can we, Josh, I don't know how you feel, can we keep it in our subcommittee and try to build that and see if other folks that want to be a part of it? Bottom line is I'm way in favor of it, but I think there's a lot to explore with how we implement something like this in Salt Lake City and how it would mesh with what they have. So I want to look at it, but I think it needs some detail.
Yeah, and I think Dante is aligned with where my head is on this. If it is too time consuming and to dig in and make a specific recommendation, that at minimum make a recommendation related to engaging in a process to develop the appropriate model with a statement of intent behind that. But our hope is to make a more specific recommendation, but at minimum, one based on intent of this.
So are you thinking like a task force recommendation to develop a task force to develop the best way to implement a program like this? Is that what you're thinking?
Potentially. I mean, again, we're in the third quarter and third and a half. If we have time to get specific, and the chief has been involved in this, and assistant chief, I think, can give assistance to what already exists, what we might build on, we might get there. But at minimum, something like that, I think we want to move it forward.
With a budget recommendation, that there needs to be dollars set aside for possible implementation of something once a task force, for example, would make a recommendation.
Got it. Thank you for that clarification.
I still like the idea of talking to Jessica Waters and dispatch to give us even though not a specific, but at least not a totally global kind of recommendation. Yeah, that's just, it would provide me at least with better understanding of what PD, and give them a voice, of course, too, of what that may or may not look like.
Piggyback that idea, I recall the city council meeting. Dispatch did present to the city council, and one of their concerns was retaining enough people within the public safety building. And our dispatch, I think, is dispatch for the county. Maybe Chief Dow can give more insight into that. But, you know, the first people we call for an emergency is dispatch. And a lot of the time, the information being reported from the ground is going to dispatch, and then the information officers are getting relayed can get mixed up in between that a lot. So I think we should have just as much of an emphasis behind dispatch and training as much as we do like use of force and officers responding via patrol.
Great, thank you. Let me pause. I was going to say Commissioner Suarez, I think, had her hand up, and then Chief Dowd, but go ahead, Josh.
I was just pointing, I think I'm hearing it for Wednesday's meeting, have Jessica Waters there, and we can build on Chief Dowd is on now, and he was there at our last meeting, and so that would be helpful to understand the dispatch data.
Thank you. Commissioner Suarez, did you have something?
Yeah, I just what everyone just said. That's, I'm totally for some sort of outreach group, which as a new officer, that's one of the toughest calls to go on because you're not trained on mental health. And what a great way to have someone out there in your community helping. So.
Okay, thank you. Chief Dopp, welcome.
Yeah, great conversation tonight. We dispatch for Sandy PD. We don't dispatch for UPD. But as we're talking about these are great ideas, and we totally support having this type of thing to respond to. But as we met, if the subcommittee on policy remembers, we met with a gentleman from Pepperdine who had studied this extensively. We met with him this last week, who cautioned us to look at the numbers behind the numbers. And if I remember right, it was in the high 90% of calls that Star and Cahoots had responded on that the high 90% range that officers were called back afterwards. So if we're looking at replacing officers with this, I'm not sure that we need to look at that. And the guys from Pepperdine had a lot of good research that they were willing to share with us on that. So
great.
I just wanted to share that.
Okay, so I think we have the next step for Commissioner Prospero's excellent work. Thank you, sir. And glad you finally got to present. So next step will be in policies. I think we'll be hearing back from them or how they will make a recommendation regarding kind of next steps. So no, that's great. I want to be cognizant of time. I know we had talked about, or at least in the agenda anyway, 4 and 5, some data sharing conversations, as well as discussion more specific to the fiscal year police budget. But I think it's important to that we'll hear from Matrix and hear how they are looking at that police budget. And then I think also as it relates to what we just talked about, getting some of those dollars and cents applications that might then be turned into the ability for Salt Lake City to move on a program such as Cahoots. So I think that broader picture will be important to hear from Matrix at our next commission meeting, which then I think covers most of the agenda. Is there anyone on public comment that might have been waiting for a while before we close? No? Okay. So then if we can just take number 4 and 5, Cindy Lou, and carry that over to our next commission meeting, that would be appreciated. And
thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And I also want to, as we close, ask you to think about, as everybody keeps saying we're in the third quarter, as we come to the end of this particular segment of work, that we're not going to be able to put all the recommendations together that we all each are thinking of. But I think it might be helpful to consider some specific themes that we would also then add to any specific recommendations. So, a theme of do we want to ensure that there is just more training in general? And we want to ensure that there is a demilitarization of police. Do we want to ensure A, B, or C? We want to ensure greater diversity in the police department. Think of some of those themes that we might not be able to get to for specific recommendations, but I think would be helpful carrying forward with those specific recommendations that we have, so that the council and the mayor know broadly how this commission is wanting the city to look at its engagement with the police department. So I would ask you to think about some of those broad themes and come back with those next full commission meeting. And or you can have some of those conversations in your subcommittees. But coming back the next full commission meeting to really talk through some of those and maybe come to some decision, if you will, about what the broad themes are we would like to ensure that the council and the mayor hear from you, separate from any specific recommendation that we'll be getting to. Does that resonate? Does that sound like it would be helpful? Thoughts on that? Come on, to Steve's point, we want something to celebrate now. So tell me something.
Themes sound good. Yay.
I concur.
That sounds good to me. And I think one of our recommendations should be we continue this. This shouldn't just be ending in the summer, it continue on.
No, I think
There's
that's
a lot we can
absolutely,
do.
yep, absolutely a recommendation that this commission can make. Absolutely.
We did make one of those recommendations at the city council meeting, correct? To
wasn't-
discuss with the matrix.
It was not in the form of an official recommendation from this committee. It was a request, I think, that was made, and council said yes, but I think it's important to make sure that it's an official statement by the entire commission.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay. I love y'all. It just works well.
I hope you're doing well, Dante, and I apologize for what's going on in your community. It's been really moving to see people coming together in your state, though, and
yeah,
as a young person, you know, gun violence is something we're really worried about, but it's seeing you guys here and collectively organizing and talking about how it's impacting you, and with the true intent behind that, we can feel it even virtually. So thank you, and much love to you.
Appreciate that. I mean, Colorado's had more than its share of mass murders. I lived literally 5 minutes from Columbine and have had 6 to 7 shootings at schools since then. So I appreciate that. Okay. Well, thank you once again. I think it was an excellent engagement. I really appreciate your sharing the beginning part of this, and I think we are really getting much closer to feeling comfortable in this engagement in these difficult conversations, and that's really what has to happen. That's really what has to happen. You know, you don't make change in your comfort zone. Change happens at the edge of your comfort, and I think that's really what we need to talk about, and I think that's where we are. And so I truly appreciate your engagement in this. I always tell folks sometimes when we're doing a training that when you go home and you hear those anxiety-inducing words, honey, we need to talk, you don't really want to step into that. But once you're into it and out on the other side of it, everything is a much better place. So I'm glad that we are able to say, honey, we need to talk. So I thank you for your engagement, and good work in your committees. Have a great time in your next subcommittee, and we will see you at the next full commission meeting. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night, honey.
Thank you, Dante.